So last time I discussed my personal favorite sci-fi to sim for, I said the Covenant could survive in the 40k galaxy. Crucially though, I said, or at least I meant, survive, not thrive. They wouldn't be winning the great game that is Warhammer by any means, just
Yeah. Well, in terms of Warhammer 40k, I feel like most factions aren't winning. There are some that are more likely to win than others, and I've seen plenty of different arguments in the comments about which one it would be. Don't really think there's an accepted general consensus though. Some additional information that I got from the comments of the last video was that there are other factions with plasma weapons, like namely the Tau, and even then, those weapons don't really pierce through the armor of Space Marines, so maybe the power scaling between the Covenant versus like the Space Marines, or honestly the Imperium of Man as a whole, might not have been as accurate as it would be, or could be.
Staving off defeat and giving the other factions a bloody nose when the situation called for it. So despite what you might think, I wasn't just fanboying over Halo with all my might, because I acknowledged that the Covenant would be supreme. See, Imperium, Necron, and Tyranid fans, we can get along. Until the Forerunners show up and wipe the galaxy completely clean, that is. Now I'm just gonna fanboy over Halo. The Forerunners would be a...
Okay, I think the Forerunners were the people that were supposed to be like an ancient human civilization before 343 came in and changed the lore to them being some sort of alien race. I kind of mix up the Forerunners and the Precursors a little bit in my head. Not really sure which one is which. I think I have it right though, but yeah, just let me know in the comments. Because I think it was the Forerunners, right? Who wanted to pass on the mantle of responsibility to mankind, and Master Chief is one of the Reclaimers, and that's the reason why he's a Reclaimer. It's because, you know, they were humans.
Horrible faction to put into 40k, because it would be like if you put the War in Heaven Catan into the modern day setting of the galaxy. Not the Necrons, the Catan is their own faction. I should mention that there's going to be spoilers for the Forerunner series of books, so if you haven't read those, I would recommend it because they're really good, but either way, just be forewarned of that. Let's dive into some Halo lore, shall we?
There's so many series that I cover that have so many supplementary books about them. I think it would be awesome to do a deep dive, but the main issue is that just isn't any time. If only there was more than 24 hours in a day. Which is why I'm honestly super thankful that there are so many content creators out there who just cover lore about their favorite series.
But before I get started, let me ask, do you like boats? How about boats with guns the size of houses on them blasting each other to bits? Because if you're anything like me, that'll appeal to you a lot. And if it does appeal to you, then you should check out the fine game sponsoring this video, World of Warships. World of Warships.
I think I played this game on release. It was kind of fun. Not really a game that is really up my alley though. I'm more of a turn-based strategy, or honestly just strategy in general gamer.
This is a free game that you can play on PC where you can send your enemies straight to the bottom of the sea where they belong. And while you're doing it, you can enjoy over 40 unique maps with some absolutely crispy graphics. Sending your enemies straight to Davy Jones's locker has never looked this good, let me tell you. They've actually all just been updated. I mean, this water looks like I can jump straight through the screen and take a swim in it. I wouldn't recommend doing that, and I'm not liable if you break your screen trying to dive through it, but it sure looks like you can. You've of course got several varieties of shooty ship to take to the high seas with. You've got your destroyers, cruisers, and battleships for varying levels of boom and speed, but maybe you'd like it a bit more tactical, in which case set sail in an aircraft carrier and remind people that if you aren't looking up, you're gonna have a bad time. And of course, if you're the—
Bro, it was so difficult playing as an aircraft carrier. I felt like that would be something I would enjoy because of the top-down view, and I guess the more strategic pacing of it, but like, the enemy team would always send destroyers after you, or at least their destroyers would immediately beeline straight towards you. There was no surviving.
The kind of person who's a fan of hitting people when they aren't looking, you can always go for the submarine. There's nothing wrong with the sneaky approach. Anyone who says it's for cowards is just angry they can't untorpedo their battleship's hull. Try out all of them, and since you can either play with friends or on your own, feel free to test out new ship types and figure out what's best for you. While you're testing out new ships, you can enjoy the fact that this game is basically a virtual museum of ships to browse and look at. The game is a naval history buff's dream. Personally, I can use World of Warships to pretend my history degree means something. Huzzah! And by the way, I only told half the truth earlier. The game is available on PC, true, but it's also available on consoles, baby. If you're looking for an intense naval combat game, you can do no better than World of Warships. And you can download it right now with my link in the description. And while making this promotion, I've struck a dark deal with Darker Forces to give you some in-game goodies. If you use the code BRAVO during registration, you get 500 doubloons, 1.5 million credits, 7 days of premium account time, and once you complete 15 battles, a free choice of a premium ship. You can choose the USS Phoenix, Japanese cruiser Kuma, French battleship Corbeil, Italian battleship Dante Alighieri, or the HMS Wakeful. And while it is not currently available, there was once upon a time a crossover with Warhammer 40k in this game. So while at the moment you can't grab those skins, you can...
I think the last I heard of World of Warships was when they were doing a crossover with Azur Lane. Which makes sense, because they're both ship games, but they're very different kinds of ships. One of them I would like to ride more than the other.
You can send some corn worshipper who did straight to the bottom where they belong. Thanks again to World of Warships for sponsoring the video. Download the game now and get ready to wage war across the waves. A little bit of background to set the scene first would probably be smart. In Halo, the Forerunners were the civilization that made, well,
the rings,
Halo.
yeah.
7 of them in fact, though before that there were 12 until they got exploded. They had roughly 3 million worlds in their domain, and their technology could do...
Oh, that's right. 7. Of course it's 7. I just caught that.
pretty much anything you could think of. Live nearly forever, Dyson spheres, and massive artificial planets. If it's a sci-fi megastructure or something like that, then the Forerunners had at least one of them, most likely several. They controlled the galaxy nearly without equal, fighting and winning a war with ancient humanity and its allies who were nearly as advanced as they were. There were also the Precursors who seeded the galaxy with life before being overthrown by the Forerunners. Not quite related, but if you haven't noticed, Halo loves giving its alien species descriptors for names. There was, of course...
Oh wait, wasn't it there some sort of primordial precursor on a certain planet that got absorbed into the flood and is kind of within the grave mind? I think that's what it was called.
Of course, also the Flood, who finally put the Forerunners to the sword after millions of years of dominance, but we'll get to them later. Their empire, the Ecumene, lasted from about 10 million BC to 100,000 BC. Now, if your only knowledge of the Forerunners was from the first 3 games, then you'd reasonably think that I've lost my goddamn mind. I mean, yeah, you could tell they were ancient and powerful, but there just wasn't enough info on them to assume more than that. Similar to mankind during the Dark Age of technology or the pre-fall Eldar, there just wasn't enough knowledge of the Forerunners to get a good picture. You could theorize all you...
It seemed like a very interesting age, but things were just going too well for humanity for there to be a grimdark story, I would assume. It is something that they could maybe potentially explore in the future. I doubt it, though.
You want, but it'd be just that. Theory, with a few scraps of information to go off of. I mean, the most you'd see are those shitty sentinels that go down in a few hits, or the Didex Promethean that can be taken down with 5.56 rounds. This is because you're never fighting the Forerunners in the Halo games. You're fighting a shadow of their shadow. In the Forerunner trilogy of the books, and even with some of what we can see in modern Halo games, they're shown as one of the most powerful sci-fi factions to ever been written. At least before we start getting to things like the Zealeverse, where the Big Bang is weaponized into a mass-produced assault rifle.
We don't talk about the Zeale sequence. That is like insane sci-fi. Don't think there's really anything out there that's going to beat that.
No, I'm not making that up. Why don't we get the elephant in the room out of the way first? No, not that one. In the blink of an eye, everything sentient in the galaxy is dead. Everything that isn't a Necron and maybe the Tyranids, depending on how close they are to the Flood, is just gone. If you don't have...
Well, it was supposed to be everything, but now we kind of introduced the Endless, or whatever they're called, into the mix that can't be erased by the Halo rings for whatever reason. Not really sure where we're going with that one.
Happen to be traveling through the warp, you're dead. Depending on how you think it works, chaos could either be supercharged because of the rapid and simultaneous death across the galaxy would be racked with warp storms if not just have a whole new Eye of Terror created, or the Chaos Gods would all die out because everything feeding them just bit the dust. Either way, just about everything in the material world is gone. But here's something about the Halo array that if
it's hard to determine exactly what would happen in that kind of scenario, because it depends. Well, chaos is very dependent on just sentient beings continuing to exist. And if they're gone, then nothing feels the warp, and nothing feels chaos, and everything just ends. Which is why the Tyranids are so scary.
If you haven't read the Forerunner trilogy, you might not know. As much as it was a weapon of last resort, that's at its highest power setting. Did you know you can fine-tune the level of destruction you'd like from it? It can be limited to only a single system, or even planet. So as much as they were the final solution to the Flood, they're also just stupidly OP weapons without killing everyone in the galaxy. Got a planet you need for strategic reasons, but the Guard has it fortified to hell and back, or the Orcs are there in the usual Orc number of yes? Not anymore. Press a few buttons and now you have a nearly empty rock. You could also directly encircle a planet with one because they're just so damn big. I don't know why you would want to do it, but it was a cool scene in the books when some ancient human realized he had to Tokyo drift one around Earth to stay alive.
What? No, that's a Fast and Furious movie I would appreciate. The first 3 ones were pretty good, until it kind of became self-aware of its own meme status. But I wonder how effective it would be at wiping life off of a planet comparatively to, like, say, your usual Exterminatus. Is there a particular way to fine-tune it so that it doesn't kill off all of the harmless sentient life? I don't think so. I think it's more of a situation where, like, oh, this planet is gone, you wipe it with a Halo ring, and then they already have some terraforming technology that can speed up the recovery process of said planet.
The Forerunners also have the technology to cross the galaxies at will if they feel the need, so theoretically they could just float them in and come aboard later to their almost completely empty new galaxy. But
in a much safer way than traveling through the warp. I'm not too familiar exactly with how, I think it was called slip space, how that works, but I know that basically every other sci-fi series has a better FTL system than the Warhammer 40k, because they don't have to deal with, chaos demons.
But galactic scale death machines aren't the only advantage they have, not even close. For example, every single Forerunner has a smart AI equivalent called an Ancilla in their bodysuit. Every last one of them. They range in power from help with daily tasks to commanding entire systems of other AI. Those bodysuits also make the Forerunners biologically immortal to the point that one of them dying is noted as being a big deal. Before the Flood got to them anyways, but we'll get to that. In this regard, they were the pre-fall Elder without the psychic powers, except also their suits could still give them scientific psychic powers. Look at this bastard, he just force-pulled the Master Chief for shits and giggles. Speaking of Master...
They're kind of like pre-fall Eldar, but the Eldar reached a point in, I guess, civilization and technology that they kind of ended up creating Slanesh because of all of that. I wonder if the Forerunners were ever in danger of reaching that point in civilization, or was that never really an issue for them? Were the Eldar just, I don't know, too down bad for that much power? Not sure, but like the actual argument there is just, it's a different story. Different universes with different roles.
You know, his power armor, the apex of humanity's military technology, with shields and armor capable of taking a plasma round to the chest and just keeping on trucking? Nothing compared to the Forerunners. It was declared by Guilty Spark to be roughly the Forerunner equivalent of a hazmat suit. Not real armor, a hazmat suit. Even when he went from Mark 5 to 6 between the games, Guilty Spark was still like, why haven't you upgraded your armor, Reclaimer? Do you have that much of a death wish now that your blue stripper friend is gone? They had something colloquially...
Oh my god. Freaking Guilty Spark, man. Let me be. He's really got to understand that humanity isn't what it used to be.
Called plasma jockeys by other Forerunners, which are engineers who had the job of taming stars for future engineering projects. They'd go in, make sure the star was going to have a solar rejection or anything that would ruin the day for any Forerunners nearby working on stuff, and just generally help the Forerunners use stars like massive intergalactic Legos. Doing this wasn't a massive Forerunner undertaking that required their entire species' resources and knowledge to undertake. They sent in Steve from the IT department. This is what their miners did to get it ready for the engineers. They didn't even send the scientific masterminds to screw around with the stars. They could create pocket dimensions the size of a solar system, fill the entire thing with actual stuff so it's basically a planet the size of a star system, and then compress that space to be about the size of a football if you're not inside of it. They mastered the physical world in its entirety. I mean, like I said, the Halo rings were bigger than planets. They were regularly causing stars to go supernova with just their capital ships in their war against the Flood. Not a grand superweapons like what the Necrons have, these were just their battleships. Their weaponry could also atomize almost anything that it hit. That one you don't even gotta read into the lore to find, just play any of the newer Halo games. There's a throwaway line in the Forerunner trilogy that they were powering the construction of an installation by tunneling to another universe and taking energy from it. This isn't a major plot point in...
How does that work? Is that other universe happy that you're doing this? Probably not, but then again, there might not be a sentient life in said other universe.
How they're desperately trying to create the Halos to beat the Flood and are turning to major scientific endeavors to do so. It's like a sentence and a half of dialogue about some guy's side project. Regarding the Halos themselves again, not only did they kill everything in the galaxy, the Forerunners completely reseeded the galaxy with life after they were gone. Such was their intelligence that they set up entire systems to take care of the galaxy even though they themselves were all but extinct. Oh, and those crappy sentinels I mentioned earlier, they deployed those...
Kind of reminds me of the Xero from the Marathon lore. Like, things were still functioning despite all of them. Well, it depends on how you look at it. They weren't really gone, per se. They kind of ascended to a different state of being.
Those in the trillions. They made at least one entire planet out of nothing but sentinels. Imagine enough robots to blot out the sky and force a planet into permanent darkness, and that's just a small portion of what the Forerunners could do. On top of all this, their starships are nearly immune to damage. I'm afraid I don't have fancy made-up metals like adamantite to impress you with. I just know that one took thousands of missiles and several railgun shots going at an appreciable fraction of the speed of light and didn't even get scratched. The cherry on top of all this is that they produced all of this at a galactic scale. They can can go toe-to-toe with the Imperium in industry, and everything they have is just better. In fact, they could probably outshine the Imperium in industry, because 3 million worlds is better than 1 million. Though admittedly, Forge worlds are nuts, so I'd say it's equal footing. I mean, they built an installation several times the size of a planet outside the galaxy, for God's sake. The only thing that's done anything like that in 40k is the Catan, literal machine gods of the material world in the setting. Their stuff also lasts damn near forever in what's essentially mint condition. Take even the Necrons. Sometimes when they wake up, their programming is going a little bit wonky. Meanwhile, most pieces of Dark Age tech that the Imperium finds are either horribly broken or corrupted into near uselessness. If it is a fully functional STC, it's probably sabotaged by chaos or something, and it's going to summon a Keeper of Secrets the moment you build it.
I mean, in the Warhammer 40k universe, everybody's kind of on the back foot here. I'm not really sure if we ever go into any details about the opposition that the Forerunners faced, any of the challenges that they had to overcome in order to reach the state of technology that they have reached. I think it's certainly possible to achieve that if, you know, chaos wasn't really a thing. Actually, no. I mean, the humans in Warhammer 40k did reach that before, but then went further than that and fell because of that. All before the dark age of technology and stuff like that. I think we touched upon it in Wes's timeline video, but there was some pretty insane tech there. I think there was something similar where they were able to like move stars around or use stars as an energy source by causing them to go supernova several galaxies away or something like that. It was pretty impressive stuff.
The design it gives you. Because as is well established, no one in the godforsaken universe of 40k is allowed to have nice things. Forerunner stuff, meanwhile, works as good as it did when it was first made 100,000 years after the fact. Someone said in a Discord I was in once that the Forerunners still weren't up to 40k because the Catan could drain energy like the Forerunner could. That's fair. And yes, I was that asshole who brought up an online debate about two universes fighting. Anyways, back on topic. There's several differences between what the Forerunners did and what the Catan did in this case. One, the Catan did it to species on worlds. The Forerunner could do it to entire universes, so there's a huge difference of scale. Two, understand what all of that would entail. The Forerunners didn't just eat something that was put in front of them. They had the tunnel to another reality entirely, create and set up a system to somehow get energy from that universe, and then turn that energy into something usable. And to further set the two apart, unlike the Catan absorbing the souls of the Necron tier, this was apparently such a minor detail, such a not worth talking about accomplishment for the Forerunners that it didn't even merit an entire paragraph in the book. The guy doing it was just like, yeah, just hooking up my universe-scaled car battery to the system so I can build my megastructure, don't mind.
I think when it comes to sci-fi especially, actually I take that back. Really, any kind of power system, some can be stupidly broken OP simply because there isn't much detail about them. Like, you could very easily say that a cartoon character is able to beat said other character in a fight, because the other character is living in a universe that is extremely harsh, that is also very detailed in its power systems, whereas a cartoon character is able to just punch things and immediately obliterate them, because, you know, cartoon physics. That's very much one of the difficulties when you're trying to compare two universes that play by different rules. And I feel like at that point, it's just a matter of perspective and what your opinion is. I mean, it's certainly still fun to think about, though, as long as it doesn't turn into some sort of weird hostile conversation. Which it quite often does.
Mind me. And again, like I mentioned earlier, you know how that one edgy Catan screwed off from the galaxy and built a planet around himself? The Forerunners did the same thing and built one of their own. It's the Ark. You could see the Milky Way from it during Halo 3, and they made a bigger one before that. It just made the mistake of existing within 100,000 light years of the Flood and was destroyed. That's such a logistical feat that it's hard to even fathom what that means for the Forerunners' capabilities. Because if they built it inside the galaxy, they have the ability to move objects the size of planets around the universe at will. If they built it outside the galaxy, meanwhile, that means they have the infrastructure and technology to move such massive amounts of material around that they can build such megastructures in the infinite nothingness of extragalactic space. They could also digitize and construct mechanical bodies for people, which is what the Didact did to create the Prometheans. So if you still don't think they can match beings like the Catan, they did pretty much the same thing as what they did to the Necron tier. Relatedly, the process is pretty much the same, only you can weaponize it. They didn't even...
I guess? For those of you more knowledgeable about this, how do you think about this comparison? I'm not knowledgeable enough about how the Necrons were made or these Prometheans. I've only heard about them, so can't say.
need the conversion chambers or anything like that. It was just point the damn thing in a planet and bam, instant robot army. They of course were masters of genetics and biology as well, because why not let them have that too? They would more or less mutate themselves when they reached certain milestones in their lives by integrating the DNA of other Forerunners and taking on their aspects. This also gave them much of the memories and personality of their donor, like when the Didact from Halo 4 gave his DNA to a Forerunner previously known as Bornstellar, who after that was just called the Didact. The Forerunner known as the Librarian even started referring to Bornstellar as her husband after this happened, she being married to the previous Didact, of course. Oh, and they can also biologically...
I think we learned about this during the Halo timeline video that I did. It really calls into question what makes you you. Like, if you can just transplant some of your DNA into somebody else and they kind of become another version of you, then, I don't know. Maybe the Forerunners were able to get over this sort of existential crisis that would give me if I was ever in that kind of situation.
Imprint your consciousness into someone else without any soul magic. Doesn't matter what race you are either, they stuck a human into a Forerunner once. To hell with it, give someone the memories of a dog and let it speak to the guy every now and then. They could de-evolve you too, just in case all of this sounded too, you know, progressive and scientific for you. They did that to ancient humanity after they defeated them in a war. And because most of this video is just going to be disjointed rambling about the Forerunners' capabilities, let's talk about slipspace again real quick. It'll be even briefer than last time because this is a video for fun, not theoretical physics. Slipspace is actually a lot like the warp. Things can go wrong and people can straight up disappear.
Really?
It has streams and currents that dictate how travel is done within it. It's also slower than warp travel, at least when the warp isn't spitting you back in time 1,000 years. The thing is, this applies to the UNC and the Covenant. Forerunner slipspace, meanwhile, is nearly instant. They could cross the entire galaxy in days if they so wish to. A Forerunner slipspace drive will never vanish someone into nothingness like a human drive would. And whether it's slipspace or not, they can teleport entire armies across massive distances. On top
Okay, well, that's something new. I had always assumed that slipspace was just a much safer means of travel, but apparently not. Apparently things still go wrong. In that case, I wonder how the FTL in Star Wars would hold up. Maybe overall that's even more reliable? But thinking about it, in 40k, the webways, as I think they're called the webways, right? The thing the Eldar used to travel between planets. They used to be extremely stable, though. Like, it was very convenient to get across the galaxy that way. Until, of course, you know, chaos happened, but still.
Top of all of this, they don't have to deal with the forces of hell interfering with them or causing them to appear centuries before or after the event they're responding to takes place.
Yeah.
At the very best interpretation, the webway is still only equal to Forerunner slipspace, and it can still break down and be corrupted like the warp, unlike slipspace. Again, like I mentioned, you can also do this in atmosphere, which you can't do with the warp. The only reason the Covenant didn't do these in-atmosphere jumps is because they don't realize just how advanced the reverse-engineered Forerunner stuff is. And you can bet your Emperor bothering ass the Forerunners know what their stuff can do. And because I feel like someone might say I haven't gone enough into specifics to justify this whole video, here's a barrage of those. Their ships had weapons that cause gravity to rip apart the enemy. Each of their infantry weapons does what the Necrons do to their enemies, only faster, that is to say, tear them apart molecule by molecule. They can use antimatter weapons on their ships, which violently explodes in contact with normal matter, because that's just how that works. They had potentially up to trillions of warriors in their army at the time of the Flood War, and this was after centuries of disarming themselves due to political infighting. So,
bro. Like, with all this extremely advanced technology, all of these billions upon billions of soldiers, they could not defeat the Flood. The Flood is just built different, man. Even if you kill it, it'll come back stronger and smarter than ever.
Unlike the Covenant, they have the numbers, power, and industry to fight with. And to top it all off, at least some of them had 6 fingers. I mean, what else is there to say? 6 fingers. Maybe they had 2 tails, too. As for Psyker powers, I don't think they'll be enough. The Forerunners' advantage in every other field is too great, even ignoring the fact that they could recreate psychic powers to some extent through technology alone. Sure, the Forerunners are in trouble when Magnus or Eldrad take to the field, but the average Psyker who can just about throw a fireball without exploding himself is going to be turned into mincemeat. Anyways, now's probably time.
I think this is another point where it becomes a little bit iffy, because they wouldn't really have any way to deal with Psyker abilities. Like, it's a completely foreign concept to them, and I don't know if they would be able to tap into that kind of realm at all, whether they'd have the capability to do so. We're just kind of assuming that they're able to emulate it by using technology. But once that technology is placed in Warhammer 40k, would it even function properly? I guess on the flip side, if a Warhammer 40k faction, or like say the Eldar, that were really attuned to the warp, were to be transported into the Halo universe, would they still be able to tap into the powers of the warp there? When it comes to the magic system, this is I'm not too sure exactly how they'd fare against it.
Time to give some structure to this video instead of just continuing to ramble incoherently about Forerunner capabilities. Let's see how the Forerunners would interact with the factions of the 40k galaxy. And spoiler alert for what's coming up, you're gonna hear some variation of the words and then the Forerunners wipe them out pretty frequently. Let's start with the big lads. What would the interactions between the Imperium of Man and the Forerunners look like? Well, at first it would look just like the Imperium of Man's interactions with any other alien species that doesn't keel over and submit. Xeno, heretic, murder, kill, you know, all that overused stuff.
Yeah.
And then they would find out that, oh shit, these aliens have triple our territory and technology far beyond us. Exterminatuses, what is the plural of exterminatus? Exterminati? Whatever it is, the Imperium would start dropping those like it was going out of style, because trying to land the Imperial Guard to fight the Forerunners is just going to result in you having one less army of guardsmen.
Yeah,
and fair is
right.
fair, a virus bomb is going to hurt anyone, Forerunners or not, especially since part 2 of a virus bombing is setting the atmosphere on fire. But the Forerunners would learn pretty quickly that Imperial ships carry
Virus bombing. During Emperor's TTS, we also heard about that. I think there were comments talking about it. I read them and I forgot them. But okay. I'm assuming by the name, it eradicates all life on a planet, regardless of how advanced you are. You're gonna die.
planet busters and start devoting more assets to their navy. And then it would be a very rapid downhill spiral against the Imperium. Of course, the Space Marines would be involved in this. They're always involved. That being said, remember that funny little clip where the Didact drags Master Chief around like it's Gary's mod? That they'd still be under heavy fire from any fight with the Forerunners, and because I'm not Games Workshop, I don't feel like giving the Space Marines plot armor. Because of the level of tech the Forerunners are working with, they're gonna get cut down with little more ceremony than the Guardsmen. Ceramite will give the Forerunners as much trouble as it does the Necrons, which is to say, thank you. Anyway, that is to say it's not gonna give them much trouble at all. Plus, at a certain point, the Forerunners are gonna realize that even if the Space Marines are more trouble than they're worth to fight head on, they can just annihilate their ships and worlds to cause them to bleed to death via the most mismatched form of attrition warfare. The Mechanicus might fare slightly better, if only because of a desperate attempt to reverse engineer what few pieces of Forerunner tech they can get their hands on. The Sisters of Battle might make—
Well, that is an interesting thought. Like, if the Mechanicus were able to successfully reverse engineer Forerunner technology and just start mass producing them on all of the Forge planets, then wouldn't that just be over? Like, I guess it depends on the capabilities of the Mechanicus to understand this foreign technology, or whether studying that technology would even be safe.
Make the Forerunners minorly confused when they gun down some lady with angel wings only for her to show right back up. But resurrective immortality is only so helpful when you just get gunned down again by some alien throwing antimatter at you like it's not a big deal. Or the energy sword gun from Halo Legends. Now that'll put some hurt on anyone. Custodies are going to cause problems for the Forerunners, but in the grand scheme of things, they still won't be helpful enough to save the Imperium, because as it turns out, 10,000 is not a very big number on a galactic scale. In a 1v1, the Custodies have more than a fair shot, but it's never going to be a 1v1 for them. But let me introduce you—
I guess the main weakness of the Custodians is the fact that there are so few in number comparatively. What is the population difference between the Imperium of Man versus the Forerunners? Because there potentially could be an advantage in numbers, however, judging from all that we've talked about the Forerunners, they also have the numbers, plus everybody is geared with like the best equipment, which isn't really something that the Imperium of Man can afford. Now let's say that the Forerunners were able to get a Halo ring in here, and they were able to set it off. Would there be anything that could stop that? Would there be something the Imperium of Man could do in order to prevent that from happening? How would Psyker abilities be interacting with that kind of like mass extinction device? Would the Emperor be able to stop that? I don't know. Hard to say.
You do a more interesting concept: the Forerunners pacifying and integrating human worlds. See, in Halo, the Forerunners stomped humanity because from their perspective, it seemed like the human race as a whole was gunning for their territory, rather than humanity cleansing Forerunner planets infected by the Flood, which was what was actually happening. But in 40k, I don't think it would take too long for them to realize that there's a whole lot of human worlds that, for whatever reason, would be more than happy to be free of Imperial control. Given that a driving motivation for the Forerunners is the mantle of responsibility, which instructs them to guide and protect the galaxy, I've no doubt that a decent amount of planets that fall to the Forerunners would do so willingly. I mean, it happens to the Tau, surely the same thing could happen for the Forerunners. And while yes, it does come with the caveat that the Forerunners are a bit more equal than everyone else, once again, this is just the same as the Tau and it still works for them. By the end of this war,
I don't really know about the mental responsibility comparative to the greater good. Because the greater good is basically just mind controlling everybody, yeah? Or like, how unified are the Forerunners? Because the Imperial Man definitely has its internal strifes, and will continue to have them for the rest of time, probably. So even if the Imperium had the upper hand in the war, there could be some sort of upset with several planets, several key planets, switching over to join them. That, or if the Forerunners are able to take out any of the supply lines, then yeah, they're kind of done for. But that could be said about really any army.
I don't expect the Imperium to still be a major entity. Maybe not completely gone if only because of the Emperor, but certainly reduced to a shell of its former self. Relatedly, and admittedly this is a bit of a stretch, there's a chance that the Emperor wouldn't hate the Forerunners like other aliens. I mean, in 40k there's the Dark Eldar, the Orcs, Tyranids, Necrons, and more. Those aliens suck. But the Forerunners, who of course would still be focused on keeping themselves powerful, would still be more than willing to focus on the greater threats to the galaxy like Chaos. An interesting result of them somehow appearing in 40k could be a sort of temporary alliance with the Imperium, because as we all know, the Imperium is a god-awful government with how it treats its people, but the guys next door sacrificing entire planets to one of four Satans are probably a lot worse for galactic peace. Of course, the Imperium is still a horrendous state, and the Emperor is, to put it lightly, a bit of a control freak, so there's no way the Forerunners would tolerate the Imperium, and it would be temporary at best. That being said, it's still something I find to be an interesting idea. As for the other species, let's go. The Tau are a brief talk. The Forerunners might be able to convince the Tau to peace talks, otherwise they're gonna force them back onto their home planets like they did with ancient humanity in Halo.
I think the Tau are very different from the others, simply because they're willing to have diplomatic talks from time to time. So there is still that possibility. I do kind of agree, though, that the Tau probably wouldn't be able to hold up against the Forerunners, because the Forerunners are at like the peak of their civilization. Well, in this instance. Whereas the Tau is still kind of trying to get there.
The various other minor Xeno species would probably be turned into something between client saints and allies. The Eldar and them would likely have little reason to interact. I mean, the Craftworlds in ideal circumstances sit in their own little corner of the galaxy. If the Forerunners show up and suddenly start wiping out threats to the Eldar left, right, and center, there probably wouldn't be much in the way of reasons for them to fight. Same goes for the Exodites. That being said, any fight the Eldar try to get into with the Forerunners is going to result in there being one less Craftworld around. Biel-Tan especially is going to learn the hard way that at their weakest possible power level, a civilization equal in power to the War in Heaven Necrons just showed up. The Dark Eldar? Ha! Say goodbye, Kamara. I don't care how many black holes Vex sends their way. The Forerunners' number one priority with them is going to be to slip space rupture a Halo ring into that godforsaken place and send everyone in it to Kingdom Come.
That would probably be the best for the universe, really. Just explode a slip space drive in their home planet and just be done with it.
Harlequins, meanwhile, might actually form a sort of alliance with them, since their overall goals are generally more benevolent to everyone rather than just the Eldar. The Orcs are just going to be exterminated, like, wholesale. Oh sure, they'll do their best to put up a fight, but then some foreigner scientist is going to catapult a star at them for funsies. I wish I had more to say about them, because I do like the Orcs. War in Heaven Quark would probably give them a pretty tough fight, but modern 40k Orcs are going to tragically be pretty unceremoniously destroyed. Same likely goes for the Tyranids. Unlike the Flood, there's no mistaking this particular intergalactic swarm of locusts for a minor threat you can contain. A hive fleet is many things, but subtle is not one of them. You might say that gene sealer cults could...
Oh man, I do imagine the Forerunners being able to create some sort of gigantic bug spray. Like, oh, we don't have to detonate a Halo ring here. We just gotta use this. Potentially, with how adaptable the Tyranids are, they could evolve in such a way that they're able to overcome that difference. But I don't know if that would happen in time, or if that's like how that would work.
Could be an issue, but those Ancilla the Foreigner have in their suits would pretty quickly realize that the guy inside is suddenly praying to the Tyranids and alert other Foreigners to the threat. Remember, they all have one. The Tyranids, meanwhile, also don't have the same strength as the Flood.
Oh, yeah, that's right. One of the major strengths of the Tyranids is because they have the Shadow of the Warp, and nobody's able to really contact other people for help, and if you're trying to travel over to help them, then you might not end up where you expect yourself to end up in. So they're basically just like isolating enemies and taking them down one by one, which I think was the same argument that was used for the Covenant versus the Tyranids.
They don't expand quite as rapidly as the Flood, and they don't gain information in the same way as the Flood does. Tyranids are all about adapting to their enemies' strengths. The Flood outright steals those strengths. The Forerunners would find it much easier to deal with them, and if nothing else, they can send in the robotic armies of Sentinels to not have to worry about the whole biomass harvesting issue the Tyranids come.
I don't know how the Tyranid hive mind really works in comparison to the grave mind of the Flood. I feel like the grave mind of the Flood, with its accumulation of knowledge, and despite it being destroyed over and over again, it can always come back. Like, that's pretty OP. But I think the Flood, they also kind of freak out if there isn't a grave mind controlling them in a similar fashion. But even if there isn't a grave mind controlling them, they're still quite formidable because of how easily they can infect you. And it's just downhill from there.
There are in fact reasons that they didn't just do that with the Flood, in case you were wondering why they didn't do that in Halo lore, but we'll get to that later. The Leagues of Votann, since there's suddenly enough information on them to talk about, might get along fairly well with them. The Forerunners clearly have no problem with AI, so they might even get the Forerunners to help repair the Votann themselves. Granted, the new squats don't seem to be that much more keen on aliens than the Imperium is, and if it does lead to war, then the extra tech the Leagues have won't be enough to spare them from the Ecumene's wrath. I don't think Chaos is going to have that much luck either. Unlike perhaps even some members of the Covenant, there's nothing to tempt the Forerunners with. Tempt them with power, they have all the power they want and more. And the ambitious among the Forerunner elite aren't stupid enough to sell their souls to demons. Tempt them with pleasure? For one, their entire mentality is ensuring the galaxy is at peace with each other, which is inherently selfless. And two, they have access to almost all the pleasures anyone could ask for if they really want it. Why go for more? Because some crab-headed dude said it would feel really good, trust me, inflict plagues on them and make them suffer until they join, perhaps? Well, they're biologically immortal, and for reference, the UNSC, who would absolutely get stomped in 40k, have curing cancer as something so routine a merchant ship's medbay can treat it. If the UNSC...
Oh my god. That's pretty awesome. But regardless of that, they're still living beings. I think all living beings have something that they desire. So regardless of what they already possess, there is very likely something more that Chaos can offer them. Or Chaos can say that they can offer them. Plus, with no resistance to Chaos, I don't think that would go very well for them. But, you know, that's just my opinion.
C can do that as far below the Forerunners as they are. Disease is just not an issue for the Forerunners. There's nothing for Chaos to latch onto and corrupt the Forerunners with. As for actual battles, like with the Chaos Space Marines, well, see what I said would happen to normal Space Marines for how that'll turn out. Demons would do better, but not by much. Tzeentch demons might pull some screwy stuff on the Forerunners to take a decent amount down, but not enough to balance out what the Forerunners have in number and power. And if they reverse engineer Necron tech, which I have no doubt they would, they'll learn how to shut down Chaos. Hell, they might even team up with a few dynasties to push back Chaos, since the...
That is pretty interesting, because I think the Necrons had this whole, like, system with pylons on several different planets in order to keep Chaos at bay. But then when Cadia fell, that kind of ruined the entire network there, so... If the Forerunners were able to get their hands on that, would they be able to combat Chaos effectively? Or maybe they would be able to find some other way to do so before getting completely overrun. I kind of feel like Pancreas might be underestimating Chaos here, but he's much more knowledgeable about the series than I am, so...
The Forerunners have nothing against AI, and a few Necron dynasties aren't that bad. Speaking of, we finally have the Necrons, and oh boy is this gonna cause some colorful arguments. As well as the Krork and the pre-fall Eldar, the War in Heaven era Necrons could certainly put up a hell of a fight. While I still think the Forerunners are on equal footing with the C'tan, the sheer amount of them around as well as the numberless legions of united Necron military would be quite the challenge to take down. The thing is, this video is all about the Forerunners facing off against modern-day 40k, and the modern-day Necrons are, to be frank, a shadow of their former selves, as is always the case with 40k factions, except for the
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, almost all the other factions are just a shadow of their former selves. Much stronger in the past, but now we're all kind of stuck in this grim, dark universe, where all that we know is war.
And Tyranids, I guess. They're disunified and war with each other almost as often as the Imperium blows up its own planets, and usually for even less valid reasons. While I'm sure they've mostly woken up, there's still going to be some in slumber who have not and wouldn't be able to fight the Forerunners. Their weaponry is at best equal to the Forerunners, and combined with their lack of unity and the Forerunners' supreme industrial capabilities, there won't be as many Necrons fighting on the same battlefield as there will be Forerunners in their construct. Plus, slip space once again reigns supreme. They can cross the galaxy in days if they need to. They can burn down your planet, and then that same fleet can be a segmentum over by tomorrow. And to top it all off, even if you do think the Necrons are technologically superior, it's well within Forerunner capability to reverse engineer Necron technology. I mean, the Forerunners are so advanced that they consider binary primitive to them. Binary, that thing even Dark Age humanity used in its tech? One Forerunner found an ancient Forerunner ship and was shocked that they ever used it. That's how far they've gone beyond it, technologically speaking. The Forerunners, to throw one last bit of disconnected rambling at you, also have something called the Domain. While the Domain is absolutely monstrous and will be covered in a later video, video, because this is going to be a 3-parter miniseries, the best way to simplify it is Forerunner Internet. While information can be lost in it, more recent stuff is fairly easy for the Forerunners to access. So a Forerunner can research into Necron tech, put his findings into the domain, and bam! Every Forerunner in the galaxy can now know how that particular piece of technology works, what its strengths are, and most importantly for the military, how to counter it. There's
The entire galaxy? That is some pretty impressive information sharing. Like, honestly, just that alone, when it comes to logistics and communication, could completely offset the war. I wonder how instantaneous it is. Like, say, oh, the Forerunners are able to find a way to combat chaos, and then he just puts it into the domain, and then instantly across the entire galaxy, everybody knows how to combat chaos. Is that how it would work? That would be cool if that was the case, but I can also imagine chaos messing with that.
Far more to the domain, but for now, let's just leave it at that. And if nothing else, the Forerunners had devices accessible by individual people that could accelerate time so quickly that billions of years would pass for them in an instant. I don't care what you are, Necron or not, that's gonna mess you up. There's a lot more I could talk about the Forerunners, how they weaponize their own method of FTL, the deeper concepts of the domain, how their FTL itself started diving into metaphysics, but by now I'm sure you get the point of this video. In modern day 40k, I think the Forerunners would reign supreme and force the mantle onto the Milky Way galaxy as they did millions of years ago. And of course, this is one big opinion piece, so please tell me how wrong or right you think I am. I fully admit I'm biased in favor of Halo on this, but so what? Biases make life fun. It's good to hear a differing opinion every now and then. Either way, here's part 2. There's one less major faction, I guess, to cover in Halo for next time.
Yeah,
and they're
faction,
hungry.
quote unquote.
Now I shall talk, and you shall listen.
As always, thank you to my wonderful channel members. You are the domain to my humanity, gifting me with the ability to further my cause and continue on for the time to come. Consider becoming a member or subscribing to support the channel, and either way, thank you for watching and take care out there. Except none of these videos matter because the Halo 1 Magnum can one-shot the entire 40k universe. Also, Spartan 1337 can snap card in half like a Kit Kat. Dragon Ball Halo, come on, baby!
I'm one heck of a mama myself!
There must be some pretty insane weapons in Halo.